So we are so excited to have our closing keynote speaker tonight, Susan Rogers. And I just wanted to highlight just a few of her accolades and background because it's absolutely impressive. So Susan holds a doctorate in psychology from McGill University, where she studied music cognition and psychoacoustics under researchers Daniel Levitin and Stephen McAdams. Her research focuses on auditory memory, the perception of musical signals, and the influence of musical training on auditory development. For 2 decades prior to her science career, Susan was one of the world's few women known for her work as a record producer, engineer, mixer, and audio electronics technician. Her career highlights, include 5 years as staff engineer for Prince, producing hit singles for diverse artists such as Bare Naked Ladies, David Byrne, Robin Ford, Jeff Black, and Rusted Root, mixing hit signals for an equally eclectic list including Tricky, Michael Penn, Toad the Wet Sprocket, and Tevin Campbell, and engineering for a host more. Just an amazing body of work. Susan is also a professor at Berklee College of Music in the departments of Music Production and Engineering and Liberal Arts. She's also a Berklee online course author and instructor, and will be soon rolling out her music and neuroscience class, which will hopefully will hit next spring, so be on the lookout for that as well. And she's also the director of the Berklee Music Perception and Cognition Laboratory. In 2012, she was awarded the Distinguished Faculty Award in the Professional Writing and Music Technology Division, so just an absolute testament to her work. In tandem with the business partner and former student Matthew MacArthur, who's a Berklee alum 2010, Susan launched Boston's first not-for-profit recording studio, the record company to offer low-cost recording facilities to area musicians and free music technology instruction to area teens. So please help me welcome to the stage Professor Susan Rogers.
Hello, Berklee. Nice to see you all. I see quite a lot of us are wearing this sweatshirt. I'm sure they sold a lot of them today. I went running in there, had to have a sweatshirt. I want to preface what I'm going to talk with you about by saying how much respect I have for anyone who creates something non-essential, entertainment, a work of art, to put out there in the world in hopes that people will like it. I think that's probably the greatest hope, is that people will like it. I mean, some people hope more than anything else that they make money at it, but the number one desire is that you connect with others. So I've got lots of respect for all of you, myself included. I make things too, who are courageous enough to try and put something out there. Knowing what the odds are, knowing how difficult it is. So I'm going to be talking with you, I'm going to be talking with you about how difficult it is. But I'm going to give you some words of wisdom that I learned from folks who are so damn wise and successful, folks who are not me, folks who gave me some ideas that have pushed me and helped me to make my work as good as I can make it, which doesn't mean it's as good as it can be. It means at this time, this is as good as I can make it. After that, well, you just hope that you don't trip and fall off your skateboard, because that could easily happen. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is the musician's voice and the listener's ear. I have written and released a book on music listening. It came out last September. It's called This Is What It Sounds Like, What the Music You Love Says About You. It's based on 45 years of being, in one capacity or another, a professional listener. I am a non-musician. I don't play or write or sing. I work with musicians to be the first listener, and I'm good at it. Now, it sounds funny to say, what's your superpower? And you go, listening. It's like saying, I'm really good at looking at things. It's over there. Now, the listening is an active, not a passive process. Listening to the music we love is private and it's personal. We could play a given record. By record, I mean a piece of recorded music. So we could play a record out of these speakers right now. And acoustically, the pressure wave, depending on where you're sitting, is more or less the same thing throughout this Berklee Performance Center. But in each one of our individual brains, it's a different record. And that's amazing. So that's something for you music makers to keep in mind and to strive for, understanding what it's like to be a listener and what happens when a listener falls in love with your art. So musicians come into the studio or they get on stage and their job is to be on output. They put something out there in the world with their hands, with their lips, with their feet. They're on output. The listener is on input, and the listener completes the act that is music. If music is played in an empty room and there are no ears to hear it, is it music? Probably not. It's pressure wave, but it's not music, because music doesn't happen until it reaches a brain, and that brain interprets it and hears it as music. So often the connection between what musicians are trying to say, what they're trying to communicate, what they're trying to do, is misinterpreted or sometimes lost on the people who are absorbing it. That is why it's good, if you're an artist, to hire a record producer. You want someone in the other room who's on input while you're on output, because those are two different mental faculties, the art of listening and the art of performing, different ears. It can be done. Prince famously produced all of his own records. He did both, but he was not a mere mortal. So don't say, well, if he did it. Hang on to that. Don't finish that thought. All right. There are a lot of different reasons for wanting to make music. Your reasons for wanting to make music lead to songs about the lifestyle of being a music maker, self-expression, creative expression, wanting attention. Let's not sweep that under the rug, because actors are really not, someone just groaned. Actors seem to have no problem with saying, no, I got into this because, I just was an attention hog when I was a kid. You don't hear musicians say that very often, but it's probably true. There's money and fame, and sometimes just because it feels good. So the reasons for wanting to make music lead to different kinds of musical expressions, mainly in your lyrics is what I'm talking about here. If you got into it for the lifestyle, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you often will say when someone asks, why'd you want to do this for a living? And you're like, I couldn't do a 9 to 5. I couldn't have a boss. I want this lifestyle. So I'm going to keep writing songs that help me have this lifestyle. That's the primary motive. For self-expression, you're the artist who wants to let others know what it's like to be you. There's nothing wrong with that. Self-expression is perhaps the primary creative urge. Creative expression can maybe be thought of as other expression. What do you see of life through your unique filter? You're interpreting life through a window that no one else has. If you want attention, your songs are going to say, here's why I deserve to be listened to. Here's what's great about me. Nothing wrong with that. And if it's money and fame you want, oh golly. Often, if your primary motive is to be famous and to make a lot of money, you're going to write about whatever you think people want to hear. You're going to look at the Billboard Hot 100 and the top singles in the country, and you're going to say, that's popular right now? Okay, let me get my pen and let me write about that. You might think, oh, that's impossible. You can't get a successful career that way. I know an artist back in the 90s who decided that that's what he wanted, and that's what he did. And he had 4 successful albums back in the 90s. I won't mention his name. But it can be done. We've seen it done. My artist musician friends just disdained this fellow with all their hearts, but And sometimes you make music just because it feels good, and in that case you pick up that guitar, you go to that keyboard, and you could write about the air floating by. You can write about anything. And if you have art in you, you can make us experience that in a whole new way. What we say musically is very often different from what the listener hears. This famous Far Side cartoon from the 90s was really funny. I mean, it shows the guy saying to his dog, "Okay, Ginger, I've had it. You stay out of the garbage. Understand, Ginger? Stay out of the garbage or else." And what Ginger hears is blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger. I had a talk with Ed Robertson of Bare Naked Ladies. We gave a presentation over Zoom to the Society for Creative Neuroscience. And I got to ask Ed a lot of questions about his creativity. And he mentioned that, he said, sometimes, he said, I've had people, fans, come up to me and tell me what my songs are about. And they're certain, "Oh, it was great of you to write that song about this, and you nailed it." And he's privately thinking to himself, that's not what it was about at all. But he said he never corrects them, because often their interpretation is even better than what he had thought of, even more interesting. There are some record producers who believe in asking the artist, before you record a note, you ask the artist, what is this song about? And the reasoning is, I want to help you express what this song is about. I was one of those producers who never believed that at all. Don't tell me what it's about. Don't tell me what it's about. After it leaves you, artist, it becomes mine. Listeners are selfish, greedy listeners. We're listening not to hear about you. We want to hear about ourselves. So you go ahead and tell your story. Give me these words, give me this poetry. I'm going to make it about me. Prince recognized that. He once said to me about his fans, he said, it's not me they're interested in, it's themselves. He knew. He had a long career. Okay, so to be effective, this is what they say in psychology, to be effective, a stimulus must have a suitable receptor. Food tastes an awful lot better when you're hungry than it does when you're full. And as receptors, we change throughout the day. Sometimes we're in the mood for this, and sometimes we're in the mood for that. So there's this guy, and he's playing and singing. And he might be singing, I borrowed her car, and she got mad, lost the best woman that I ever had. And he's talking about himself and his life and what happened and what compelled him to put that pen to paper and write this story about himself and this woman. What's this guy thinking? There's a lot of cool songs about cars. Yeah, there's a lot of cool songs about cars. What's she thinking? How can I leave here without being rude? So what we put out is not often what is received. Music makers, be aware of that. Understand that. Be okay with that. What you want is to be conscious not only of what you want to say, but the experience of hearing what it is you have to say, so that you can keep tension on the line, so that you can maintain pressure between you and your audience. You won't be able to do it with everyone. There'll be people who get up and leave your shows. There'll be people who start listening to your record and then turn their back on it. I was thinking of vinyl, and I was thinking, oh, they pick up the needle and they move it off. I don't know how many people do that, but they switch over to someone else. So you can't control that. So I gave you reasons for wanting to write music. Here are some reasons for wanting to listen to music and choosing what to listen to in that moment. For companionship. Many people listen to music so that they feel less alone. For inspiration. For fantasy, I'll say more about that in a moment. For mood, of course, matching your mood, changing your mood. Music is especially effective at that. For solving problems, lyrically, music can solve problems for us, and that tends to happen when we're teenagers, and we got a lot of problems that we need to be solved because your social life matters so much when you're a teenager. You don't know what to think, you don't know what to say, you don't know how to behave, you don't know the best way to put yourself out there in the world, you don't know who to be, and you can listen to that musical artist who will tell you, you want to be this. And you think, all right, that'll do for now. And then sometimes we listen to music just because it makes us happy. So the records we would choose if we are craving companionship is music that doesn't demand active listening, music that satisfies with passive listening. By that I mean music that doesn't hide its light under a bushel barrel or basket, whatever the line is from the Bible. Music that is simple and repetitive and doesn't have a lot of dynamic changes. A lot of popular music these days fits that bill because it's music that we can put in our earbuds and we can do other things. We can work out, we can walk to work, or we can listen to it in the car as we drive to work. Many people listen to music as they work, as they're writing or typing or doing other things, because it keeps them engaged. But the music that is made to serve that function is going to be very different from the kind of music that I made back in the 80s and 90s, where we were more likely to have active, not passive listeners. We will choose a record sometimes for inspiration, because it's art. And a great artist can convey everyday things in a very original way. The artists, the lyricists that we love the most are those who can express what it means to be human in a way that others don't. Fantasy. My co-author and I, Ogi Ogas and I, we needed some data on what people visualize in their mind's eye when they're listening to their favorite music. And it turned out that data didn't exist out there, so we had to conduct a study. And we surveyed 1,700 music listeners in the United States, and we asked them this question: what do you see in your mind's eye when you are listening to your favorite records? What do you picture? Now, since I was this big, my whole life, my one go-to fantasy is I picture the performers. I think I was born to be a record maker, because my favorite fantasy is to put that music on and visualize in my mind's eye those performers. Now, I have tried to picture myself. I'm singing, I'm playing. Yeah, I can't hang on to that fantasy. One, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. It's not as rewarding as picturing the players. And I asked Ogi, what do you see? And he said, abstract shapes and colors. I thought, oh, wow, that's totally weird. And then I asked my dearest friend, who is one of the finest musicians I've ever known, what do you see when you listen to your favorite music? And he said, abstract shapes and colors. So it's rare, but it's no indicator of how much the music is inspiring you. The majority of people who listen to their favorite music are doing so to have the visualization of themselves, of autobiographical memories. They want to see the people, the places, the events, the times in their life when this record was popular. 1 out of 4 listeners in the United States of America said that that was their go-to visualization. 1 out of 5 music lovers in the United States said that their go-to visualization, this blew my mind, they make up a story based on the lyrics. And the story won't even necessarily involve them. It won't even necessarily involve the artist. They make up characters who act out that story. Lyrics matter. And then other visualizations include things like, well, the beach or the mountains or nature scenes, or yourself performing, of course, or being at a concert. Anyway, we'll choose records to give us the fantasy that we most enjoy. For our mood, sometimes we want to change it and we want romantic music or something hip or something sophisticated or something uplifting. For problem solving, that lets you live vicariously through the singer, and good vibes enhances whatever it is you're experiencing. I want to tell you a super quick anecdote. There was a young man from Baltimore who's a young journalist, and we were talking years ago about the new Solange album. This was in 2016. It's called A Seat at the Table, and we both saying, oh, we really like this record. It's such a good record. I like Solange. And then he said, but I'd never listen to it when I'm out with my friends. And I said, why? And he said, guys just don't do that. Guys don't listen to records by women when they're out with other guys. And I thought, oh yeah, me too. When I go out with the girls, we never listen to John Legend. What would they think of me? I mean, it just is so ridiculous that it was funny, but there was an element of truth in that, because he was expressing The music we listen to, that I listen to, reflects who I am. And I love this Solange album, but I don't want the guys to know that that record is the music of me as well. Connecting with listeners rewards their attention by releasing neurotransmitters, including endorphins. This is the very famous photograph by Alfred Eisenstadt in 1963, children in Paris watching a puppet show. If you're a live performer, isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you want? Is that as good as it gets? Those kids are feeling it, and there's excitement, and there's neurotransmitters coursing through their body, endorphins that are making them completely engaged. But look at the variety in those expressions. Look at the different thoughts, or consider the different thoughts that might be going on underneath. This guy is like, yeah, he's got his fist up in the air. She's, no! You can see her hands are almost in a defensive posture. Her eyes are slightly different than his eyes. This kid here is like, this is all just a little overstimulating to me. This one here is probably, what the? And the little one is probably thinking, what is this? I don't understand. So, same thing with our audiences. Just because you killed it on stage doesn't mean that everyone had the exact same experience. Remember the diversity. Remember that the most successful works of art build up rather than tear down. And I feel like this is screamingly obvious, but it's not. So many of our Berklee music makers, the vast majority, will present to their teacher, to the class, their work. And the work they present is a ballad that brings the room down. I don't know if you've noticed, but the vast majority of hit singles anyway are more uplifting. It's harder to write comedy than to write tragedy. It's easy to pull people down. The musician's goal is to add to, not subtract from, people's current mental, emotional, physical state, to add to it. Beginning music makers and songwriters can mistakenly presume that, a lot of mistakes here. One, by playing a ballad, they often presume that the audience is listening. There aren't many people my age in this room, but in the 70s, 80s, 90s, when we would sequence an album, there was a rule of thumb that you followed. Vinyl, side A, your first two songs, song 1 and song 2, were generally your singles, the songs you wanted promoted as singles. You want to start upbeat, energetic, arousing, get their attention when they put the needle on that record. The earliest a ballad would appear on an album would be song 3, and often even later. But by song 3, okay, let's bring the tempo down just a little bit and let's transition into a new mood. Starting with a ballad is the equivalent of, I think it's the equivalent of letting that spotlight of attention find you when you're backstage in your underwear. No, you want the spotlight of attention to find you when you're dressed up, when you're ready to put your best face out there. They sometimes think, well, they'll be moved by my honesty. No. Honesty and candor, being willing to go there and describe your psyche, is not enough. My story is interesting. Maybe. But do you know how to take your story and craft it in a way that gives us something new and tells us something about ourselves? Here's one, logic. A, people love music. B, I'm making music. C, therefore people will love my music. I am surprised by the number of music makers who say that their record that they've just finished making is ready to go out the door, it's ready to be released on streaming platforms, and they want their teacher's advice. Good for them, and they'll play it. And it's so far from being ready. It is so far from being ready. They haven't taken the ball far enough down the field. They're nowhere near the goal. It's not their fault. Maybe they haven't learned where the goal is. Maybe they haven't learned how much work, how much thinking and changing and rewriting and redrafting and re-editing needs to go into a work of art before it's ready to go out the door. Here's a better logic. People love some music. The music that people love as individuals is only a portion of all the music that there is out there in the world. So when you release yours, it could very easily, in fact, the odds are good, it's gonna fall into the category of music that they don't like rather than music that they like. Do yourself a favor and work harder to get your music in such a shape that it can attract as many listeners as possible. And then a fallacy is thinking, nailed it. Not quite. So in grad school, I learned about 7 different ways that recorded music can, independently of the other ways, the other dimensions, give us a treat. And by treat, I mean a release of dopamine that makes you feel good in listening to music. Of these 7 independent dimensions or features of a record, 4 of them are the familiar musical ones: melody, rhythm, lyrics, timbre, sound design. The other 3 are aesthetic. They apply to all art forms. I'll give more of an explanation on the next slide. But there's authenticity. Authenticity is your personal assessment of the honesty in the performance. Is that singer singing her heart out? What does that sound like to you? Is that bass player flirting with you on that bass? Is that drummer digging in and giving it his all? When I worked with the great record producer Tony Berg, I was his engineer, the number 1 feedback he'd give artists when he'd get on that talkback is, dig in, dig in. We can hear, we can tell, we know intentionality. This work is studied at Boston University by the great Ellen Winner, who looks at intentionality in visual art. We can tell when you're not feeling it, you're not being sincere, we listeners. So authenticity, when it's great, is going to give you a treat. Realism is opposed to abstraction. I like realistic records made with real musical instruments, drums and bass and piano and guitars and stuff like that, because my favorite fantasy is visualizing the performers. My co-author, Ogi, his favorite music is electronic. He likes abstract records because he does not want to see people performing in his mind's eye. That's not uncommon. So we may prefer realistic or abstract records, and we can get a treat if a record matches what we're listening for. And then there's novelty versus familiarity. Some of us like a higher degree of experimentation and innovation in our musical forms. We're not only tolerant of it, we seek it out, whereas others are far more likely to revere and enjoy the traditional musical forms. Classic reggae, classic rock, classic bebop jazz, hewing to a tradition. Either way is good. We all have our preferences. So over a lifetime of listening, we form sweet spots on all of these dimensions where a given feature gives us the biggest treat. So what is going on in the listener's brain when they're hearing a record that they've never heard before, or a familiar one as well? But let's say it's a brand new record, you've never heard this before, and it's playing. Immediately what you're doing is you perform auditory scene analysis to separate the sounds of music from the ambient sounds, so that your friend's voice or whatever garbage truck out on the street, that doesn't get incorporated into the musical signal. So after you do that automatically, the next stage of processing is timbre processing. Within 1 second, listeners can recognize if this is a classical album, an orchestra, if it's EDM, if it's jazz. This has been studied. And within 1 second, we're likely to say, this is the music of me, or no, I don't care for this genre of music. Within a second. That's chilling. After we've assessed, yeah, this sounds like the kind of thing I like, our auditory signal splits off, and it goes to different regions of the brain for further processing. We can independently get into that groove, focus on that rhythm, attend to just that. Or, using slower processing, we can focus on the melody and the harmony. Listen for when that chord change is going to come. Or we can turn our mind over to, for most of us, the left temporal lobe, and we can listen to those lyrics. And you can move your spotlight of attention around, depending on where you find your treats. If you find your treat in rhythm, odds are good you're just going to stay there. And you won't be able to hum that melody back later. You won't remember the lyrics. Maybe you remember, I think they said baby or something, but other than that, I don't remember. Because that groove got you so hard. And what happened was you liked it so much, it matched your listener profile. Dopamine was released. You went into your own head, and you had your treat. If you continue listening, there are these broader ways of assessing works of art. You might assess it for its authenticity, or its novelty, or its realism, and you may find a treat there. Musically, maybe it's not satisfying to you at all, but you sure as hell admire how hard those punks, let's say, because punk music is all about authenticity, how hard those punks worked for your ear. Doesn't have the melody, the rhythm, the lyrics that I can understand or like, but hot damn, they gave it their all. I like this. I like this. That can release a little bit of dopamine. Or you might appreciate their innovation. Or you might appreciate just the recording itself, whether it's abstract or realistic. So music listening can release dopamine when a feature of the music meets or exceeds our expectations. We don't need all 7. The records that are in your and my personal library reflect the treats that we've found on these different dimensions for different reasons. This is a hot topic in neuroscience right now, and it's the default network. The default network is a network of interconnected nuclei in the brain that represent our sense of self, self-image, self-awareness. Carla Christoph and her team wrote in this wonderful review paper, if you ask people, are you thinking about something other than what you're doing right now? 30 to 50% of the time they say yes. 30 to 50% of you in this audience right now have had your brains go into your own heads and you're not really paying attention. You'll pay, if it gets good, you'll come back around. But this is what brains do. Teachers, there's nothing wrong with that. Parents, let your kids go into their own heads. That's what brains do. And often when we go into our own heads, it's because we just got inspired. We just heard something that was interesting to us. So instead of being outward, we go inward and we roll that marble around a little bit. So the default network is you. It's private. You're the only one who experiences it. You're the only one who knows it. Robin Wilkins and her team at Wake Forest University showed that when people are listening to music that they like, it activates their default network. When listeners are hearing a record that they like and they find a treat, they shut out that outside world and they savor that record, and their auditory cortex communicates with their motor cortex where movement happens, and it communicates with the default network. And the response the listener experiences is, this is the music of me. This artist is expressing me, my life. You have your visualization, you have your fantasy, you enjoy that record. Now, she showed in the fMRI scanner, functional magnetic resonance imaging, where you can watch a brain in real time, which areas light up. She also had people come into the lab with records that they dislike. Fun. So she played them records that they disliked while they were in the scanner. And there's a little gatekeeper, the precuneus, the one on the right-hand side, that is not part of the default network, but it connects to it. And it's also involved in creativity. And that little precuneus hears music it doesn't like, it's saying, no, no, stay away from me, not the music of me. And it decreases its connections to the default network to keep, as Robin put it, to keep disliked music from being incorporated into our sense of self. Music makers, you can't please everyone. Don't try. Find your people who like what you're putting out there. She's showing that spontaneous thought is the originator of creative thinking. So let your minds wander. It helps your creativity. So as I said, sincerity, candor, truth, and desire, wanting this, it's not enough. Mastering your craft and having something original to say are the building blocks of a life in the arts. These quotes are from my dear friend Tim Bruckner, who's a sculptor, and he's been making art for 50 years, and he's wiser than me, and I learn a lot of great things from him. He says, craft is what sustains you when art fails you, which it will 90% of the time. Every artist knows this. You first must learn to master your craft, because if you've got technique, when art meaning inspiration, the muses, creativity, when it won't come, and you can't force it, when it doesn't come, you can keep busy with your craft. With your craft alone, you can get a lot done. Goodness knows, being in the recording studio, even with one of the most creative human beings of his generation, Prince, there were many times when creativity, art, original thought did not come. He kept busy. He just program that's where a lot of those dance tracks came from. You just program a drum groove, get the bass out, play some chord changes, waiting for inspiration to strike. And that's a big difference between the songs that ended up in the vault and the ones that were released to the public, the ones that actually represented being visited by the muses. So practice, 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 practice. Master your craft first before your art. A life in the arts is a life in problem solving. Learn from the best. Any problem that you need to solve in any of the arts has already been solved by people who came before you. Don't think you're going to hurt your art by not listening to the art of other people. The opposite is true. Absorb great music. Absorb great music. Listen to greatness. Internalize what greatness sounds like. You'll learn, even implicitly, how they solved certain problems to make this record great, to match your listener profile. Listen to a lot of music. He says, because he's a sculptor, Tim says works of art should give the viewer, the consumer, a sense of what happened right before you encountered it and what's going to happen after you leave it. God, is that important. Your musical works of art shouldn't start with, once upon a time, or I saw you there. Start with action. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Start with momentum. Fill in the details in the second verse. I was just in Barcelona, Spain, and I went to the Picasso Museum, and this painting is there. It's one of his famous ones, Science and Charity. He painted it when he was 16 years old. His father, to be fair, his father had an art school, School of Fine Arts, and this kid was learning how to push paint around on canvas to get paint to reflect cloth and skin and hair and wood and china. 16 years old, he was mastering his craft first. By age 51, he was a master of his craft, and the art had well emerged. Same thing with Prince. He worked as a teenager so hard to become fluent on guitar and piano and bass and drums and vocals and lyric writing. He wasn't quite ready in his first and second album, but he got there. Craft first, your art will emerge. His emerged by his third album. That's the wonderful Sudan Archives, who I just got turned on to, and I think she's fantastic. So how do I, as a music listener, instantly say, oh yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. That's an artist for me. Someone sent me a link to her performance on the Jimmy Fallon show. Blew my mind. Great, crazy, great. Why? What was I seeing? What was I seeing? That's an artist. That's an artist. Every little detail of her performance, every little detail shows that she's interested in something beyond music, and she's connecting her art, her musical expression, to a larger sphere of culture and society and aesthetics. So be a student of the game. Study works of art in any medium that are considered great. Those musicians with long careers, I have not known one exception to this. Musicians who are successful and have long careers usually have a deep passion, always have a deep passion for some other art form, which might be prose, or it might be poetry, it might be film, it might be, paintings or something. Read literature, poetry, and learn about the artists. Listen to the artists in interviews or read their interviews when they're talking about their art and their craft. This is the last slide. Give your work momentum. That's action that goes beyond itself. There's Picasso again. That's a seated woman. You can just see her foot tapping, and you can see she's kind of biting her fingernail. Who does that? Who paints someone sitting in a chair and has them biting their nail? He was a maestro of infusing his paintings with momentum, with action. I get a sense, looking at that, of what happened right before I glanced at it and what's going to continue to happen when I look away. A more modern example is Walter White. What you're seeing there is from scene 1, episode 1 of Breaking Bad. The very first thing we see is a Winnebago flying down the desert, goes into a ditch. This man gets out. He's in his underwear, and he's got an apron on, and I remember there's a gas mask and maybe some pants coming out the window, and he gets on a recorder. He says, "My name is Walter White, and I live at blah, 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 blah," and you hear these sirens in the background. That's how they start. Knowing that if we can capture your attention with momentum, you're going to hang on and you'll learn about the details later. We don't have to tell you the story chronologically. You'll stay with us. Same thing in your lyric writing, which is why the opening line in a song is the most important, and it should have momentum. This is from Bruce Springsteen, Thunder Road. Screen door slams, Mary's dress sways. There's action there. There's slamming, there's swaying. It starts with movement. And in the morning when I wake up, I tend to prevaricate. It's risky to start lyrical lines with the word "and," because often it's lazy. He opened his song with the word "and." To let you know, the opening line in this song is coming in mid-conversation. And he's saying, when I wake up, I tend to lie. The poet, Tupac, said, some say the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. I say the darker the flesh, the deeper the roots. He's taking something that we know, a well-known saying, showing us that he's a poet and an original thinker, putting a new spin on it. You're interested in someone who thinks like that. Another opening line that's considered by some to be one of the greatest opening lines in all of music. I am the sun and the air of a shyness that is criminally vulgar. Written by Morrissey in the 1980s, Morrissey of the Smiths. He's talking about being gay. It was still illegal in Great Britain. And he's saying, I am the sun and the air, and also playing on the elements, the sun and the air, of a shyness that is criminally vulgar. That was a career-making single. The song is How Soon Is Now. It's a great opening line. And a record I did with Prince, Sign of the Times, features this opening line. In France, a skinny man died of a big disease with a little name. Right around that time, this was 1987, Rock Hudson had gone to France, hoping for a cure for his AIDS, and it didn't work. He passed away. Prince doesn't mention Rock Hudson. He doesn't mention AIDS. He gets you to fill in those missing words by saying in France, Rock Hudson was in the news, a skinny man, we knew it was a wasting disease, died of a big disease with a little name. So, we'll have time for questions. Let me do this. In writing this book about music listening, I went around to some Berklee students who are now friends, and I asked them, describe for me a record that you fell in love with at first listen, that makes you swoon, and tell me why. Here's what they said. When I listen to this, I feel seasick, I get chills, but for some bizarre reason, sometimes I chase that feeling. What is this record? Eventually, by Tame Impala. It's both threatening and inviting, but it conjures up a feeling of who I am. And this person went on to say, like being both the mosquito and the blood that it seeks. What is this? Funkier than a mosquito's tweeter. Nina Simone. There you go. I get a feeling of empathy for the performance, but also a solitary feeling. There's so much internal adventure in there. And this person's record love is Mojo Pen, Jeff Buckley. He says, if you close your eyes and listen for the full 40 minutes, there's no way that you cannot cry. Goldberg variations, Bach. This kid's a violinist, and makes me emotional. This person says it has a broodiness, a darkness, and I'm drawn to dark things. It sounds like it's speaking almost from beyond the grave. And she went on to say, like Emily Dickinson looking down at her own body. Woo! Religion by Sheena Ringo. She's great if you don't know her. And this person says the feeling is solemn, but there is happiness and hope. If I knew that a nuclear bomb was coming, I'd put on that record. Who makes a record that causes a listener to say, I'd be okay if this were the last thing I ever heard in my life? What is this record? Broke Down Palace by the Grateful Dead. None of these records give me that same ecstasy. Perhaps they don't for you either. Maybe one does. That's my point. The treats we get from music listening, the love, the emotion, the feelings. That's a private computation that happens between you, your auditory cortex, and your dopaminergic reward system and your experiences. Each listener in this world is unique. So record makers, think about those listeners and work harder than you think you have to or need to get their attention, to be worthy of their attention, and to try to inspire words like this about your work. If you're interested in the book, it's got this groovy psychedelic cover, and I thank you for listening. We do have some time for questions, if anyone would like to ask a question. Please.
So having worked with Prince and, having seen some of his videos, it seemed like he had a little bit of a, ego. I don't know if that's the right word, but how are you able to say, hey, this would probably be better if you went in another direction? Because I'm sure he was very, strong-willed.
That's funny because, no, you didn't say that to Prince. You didn't say that to Prince. And it was ego, but it was a healthy ego. I mean, consider this. Imagine that you've just turned 25 years old. You're embarking on your 6th studio album at age 25. You've just gotten the green light from Warner Brothers to make a semi-autobiographical movie of your life. You're only 25. You've played to tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, maybe, I don't know, coming off the 1999 tour. You know what you're doing. You're doing all right. So he was an exceptional human being, and he knew the kind of music I loved and that I was a fan of Prince before I worked for him, so he did ask what I thought of things, and I would be honest, but he followed his own compass, so... we just let him go. Yeah, and of course, he made blunders like every artist. He made some works that are not great, but the majority of what he made is pretty damn good. Oh, hello.
Hi. A question that I'm kind of wondering about, and this is so true now that I'm thinking about it and understanding why I and everyone else here, why we like the music we like, is because it relates to us.
Right.
And so it makes me think as an artist, when you are, bearing, you could say stripping yourself naked and you're telling your story, and sometimes, we even get specific about the details of our story and everything. How do you, from what you've learned, how do listeners of that story, your unique story, how do they take that story and make it their own? Especially if you get more specific.
Yeah, they're listening for something that the scholar Joseph Campbell wrote about called the universal truth. In the 1960s, Joseph Campbell, who was a scholar, and I think he was at Harvard, he wrote about mythology, that was his thing. He wrote a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and it was hugely influential to folks like Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney and other artists. He described the universal truth in terms of myths and how the great storytellers like J.K. Rowling or Tolkien, people who write these stories that so many people love, have managed to tap into a part of the psyche that is true for everyone. So you don't, to enjoy Harry Potter, you don't have to live in England, and you don't have to have magic powers, or you don't have to, all the specifics are all great, and that's all just making the story feel all the more real. What you're responding to is what every child has ever experienced, a feeling that you're different from others, that you're all alone, that maybe you're not capable of doing this, but if you've got your friends, it can maybe happen. So if you read that book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, especially in the early chapters, he'll talk about the universal truth. And if you have tapped into a universal truth, it's okay to use the specifics, because the rest of the lyrics will say, you're writing about an experience that I know. Wow. Yeah, it's a great book. That book is great. And thank you. The main example he gave, it kills me. Brian Wilson, In My Room. Simplest lyrics ever. There's a world where I can go, tell my secrets to, in my room, do my crying, do my sighing, laugh at yesterday. What teenager hasn't felt that? That's the universal truth. Joseph Campbell writes about it. That's writing about something that caused us to nod our heads and say, yeah, I know what you're saying. So it doesn't have to be poetic in the sense that it doesn't have to be original. But if you can go to that dark place in your psyche, and as he writes about it, he's talking about the hero's journey, and he says writers who can go to that deep, dark place in their psyche usually come back damaged as a result. Being very creative is comorbid with certain mental or psychological difficulties at times, foremost depression. And things like that. If you're very, very creative, it comes from going down to that well in your psyche so often. You come back up, and you're socially isolated. You're not like other people. But part of the hero's journey. It is. There's so much good stuff out there. There's so many scholars who write about music and being an artist and art. And it's good to, if you're an artist, it's good to immerse yourself in the worlds of art and study the greats. In any medium that you choose, study the greats. You'll learn a lot from them. It's called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's by the late Joseph Campbell. He did a PBS series in the 80s on mythology. Joseph Campbell was a great scholar. That book is a classic among music recording artists. It helps them learn how to write lyrics, actually. All right. Well, if we don't have anything else, I thank you very much for your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan.